Steve Jobs is one of the world's most well-known and well-loved CEOs. He's the founder of Apple, which makes the iconic iPhone and Mac. Fun fact, Steve Jobs started the Apple Computer Company in Jobs' garage in 1976. He was only 21 years old at the time. From there, he grew it into what is now the world's foremost technology giant. Amazing, but things weren't always smooth sailing for Jobs. Did you know that he was once fired from the very company he started? How did that happen? How it all began. Before we answer these questions, let's first take a look at the humble beginnings of Apple Inc. In 1976, computers were humongous. They were big, clunky, and often occupied an entire room. At that time, you could not put a computer inside your house unless you had a room big enough for one. Cut to two college dropouts. Steve Jobs and his friend Steve Wozniak had a vision to change the way people viewed computers forever. Inside the hulking room-sized machines of the time, they wanted the computer to be small enough to fit inside a home or office cubicle. The pair then built the first ever Apple computer in Steve Jobs' garage. They named it the Apple I, and they sold it as just a circuit board. That means no monitor, keyboard, mouse, or even a casing was included. In true Apple fashion, they sold these components as add-ons starting in 1977. Then they developed the Apple II, which was the first personal computer to have color graphics. Thanks to it, sales went through the roof. Apple earned $117 million in 1980. 1980 was also the year Apple went public as a company. At this point, Jobs was running the business side while Wozniak took care of the engineering and technical sides. Despite the company's skyrocketing success, it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows for the two Steves. Business challenges. Jobs and Wozniak were very talented in terms of the tech, but they really weren't well versed in business. Running Apple took a toll on them, and Wozniak eventually left the company in 1983. He was no longer interested in the day-to-day operations of the business. Jobs couldn't do it alone, so with his buddy's exodus, he took someone in from the outside. He chose John Sculley, who was then the CEO of PepsiCo, to join Apple. He pitched the job to Sculley with these words: "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley agreed and made the move from PepsiCo to Apple. At this point, Jobs wanted so much to be Apple's CEO, with Sculley being his right-hand man, only there was just a slight problem. Apple's board of directors didn't think that Steve Jobs was fit to be the company's CEO. How Jobs does his job. Though Steve Jobs did a lot to take Apple to the skies, he wasn't the best leader for his team. Many Apple employees actually hated him. They said Jobs was really hard to work with. He micromanaged a lot, he had a knack for sweating the small stuff. And what Steve Jobs wanted, Steve Jobs got. He didn't want anyone getting in his way. If he wanted something, he'd push his people hard. Some of them ended up getting hurt emotionally, but that didn't matter to Big Boss Jobs. All that mattered was finishing projects within his deadlines. Pretty soon, this attitude rubbed off the wrong way. Steve Jobs gave his people a lot of rough treatment, which they didn't appreciate at all. What's more, he regularly meddled with projects that really didn't involve him. Apple's board then picked up on this behavior, and that explains why they didn't think Jobs was fit for the role of CEO. The captain was too hard on his crew. Apple falls from the tree. 1985 was a tough year for Apple. At the time, Jobs developed Lisa, the first ever computer to have a graphical user interface. In practice, Lisa was an excellent product. It was well made and worked like a charm. But business-wise, Lisa was a flop. Sales of the product were rock bottom. Then Jobs had another project he called the Macintosh. This was the ancestor of the modern Mac computers. While it sold a lot more units than the Lisa, the revenue was not enough to challenge IBM, which was the leading computer company at the time. Sculley wasn't satisfied with this performance, so he wanted to reassign Jobs away from the Macintosh project. That happened during a historic board meeting in 1985. Unless Jobs relinquished his position as manager of the Macintosh division, Sculley threatened to resign. Jobs caved, but he remained the chairman of Apple. Here, Sculley didn't fire Jobs yet, but he did put some tabs on the Apple founder. Attempted coup. Naturally, Steve Jobs was not at all happy with what John Sculley did to him. Jobs asked Sculley if he could get his old job back, but Sculley refused. A frustrated Jobs then told Sculley to resign, but that didn't work out either. Jobs wanted to take back control of Apple so badly. To achieve that, he planned to overthrow Sculley, even recruiting people within Apple to help him out. While he did gain some allies, they warned him that the board would not take him back willingly. Despite the warnings, Jobs decided to go on with his plan. The idea was to secretly take over Apple while Sculley was on a business trip to China. But one of the people who knew the plan ratted out to Sculley, who promptly canceled his flight. Sculley then called an emergency board meeting and Jobs was part of it. In the meeting, Jobs expressed how Sculley was bad for the company. The board, though, didn't take his side. Because of Jobs' remarks, he was further removed from power. That's when Jobs was officially fired from the company. The story is different depending on whom you ask, though. If you ask Sculley, he would say that Jobs voluntarily left the company. But if you were to ask Jobs, he would have said without a doubt that he was fired from Apple. Also, he and Sculley never talked to each other again after that. What happened next? After leaving Apple, Steve Jobs founded another company called Next. His aim was to create the next generation of computers, and he hyped them up quite a lot. The computers were great in terms of specs and functionality, but they were expensive, so they really didn't sell well. On the side, Jobs also acquired Pixar Animation Studios, the producer of iconic animated films like the Toy Story series, Monsters, Inc., and Finding Nemo. Back at Apple, the company under Sculley was experiencing some major malfunctions. After 1991, Apple released flop after flop. Two of the most well-known Apple fails of the 90s were the Newton, a Palm Pilot-like device that had faulty handwriting recognition, and the PowerPC series of computers that veered away from using cheaper, more efficient Intel processors. Not only that, Sculley also turned down an offer by Microsoft's Bill Gates to license Apple's software. That was a choice the company would soon regret as Microsoft's Windows operating system rose to fame in the 90s. By 1996, business analysts believed that Apple was doomed to failure. They desperately needed an operating system that could compete with Microsoft, so Apple turned to Next. That's right, Jobs' company Next. Apple bought it in 1997, and the board even asked their old friend Steve Jobs to come back in. With that, Jobs became Apple's interim CEO, or iCEO as Jobs liked to call himself, and 3 years later, Jobs became the official CEO of Apple once again. What was one of the first things Jobs did once he was back on? Strike a deal with Microsoft. He teamed up with Gates and Company to create Mac versions of the popular Microsoft Office suite. After that came the age of the iDevices. First up, Jobs introduced the iBook laptop. He also created a line of MP3 players called the iPod, and alongside it, Apple's own music management software called iTunes. You can argue that making iPod and iTunes was Jobs' best move for Apple, making it rise above the ashes. iPod is one of the best-selling portable music players of all time. Before long, Jobs had an idea to combine the iPod and the mobile phone, resulting in the iPhone. Since it was first released in 2007, the iPhone has gone through 12 generations in just over a decade. Steve Jobs getting fired from Apple wasn't all bad. It sparked a series of events that would lead him back to the company he created, making it stronger than it was before. Now that's what a true CEO is like.